Um, Thank you, Shanda. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Education Technical Learning Lab webinar. Today, we are going to discuss meal in meal, specifically in education. And we have our guest speaker, Nestor Mogollon, who's the meal director at ADRA International. So it's a pleasure to for him to join us and also for you to be with us. What we're gonna do, we're gonna share the floor with Nestor, who's gonna give the presentation. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, we're gonna have specific time for that. But feel free to use the chat to add your question. And I'm also gonna request that please share where you're joining us from on the chat, but also for your name. Please also add where you're joining us. We'd love to get a poll of where our participants are from. Yeah, keep yourself on mute as much as possible. If you have a question, please raise your hand. And for those of you who want to join the Education Technical Learning Lab community of practice, I encourage you to go on HumHub and sign up for our list. We're gonna post the recording of this session on HumHub, and I also wanna say that if you have any questions or comments, feel free to contact me. Feel free to contact any members of the Education CLL. I think the ones who are here are Jonathan, Chotel. We have Anna, Julius, and there might be some other people who are coming in later on. So feel free to share any questions that you have and also any ideas or suggestions. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to Nestor, who will share with us the presentation.
Thank you, Billy. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. I know that there are a lot of people for different time zones. So thank you for the invitation. The idea today is to discuss a little bit more on how we can use a meal in the education program, especially education in emergency context. And what we are going to share today is, let me share more on indicators related to, let me share my screen. I don't know if everybody can see my screen now. You can see my screen? Okay. Well, yeah, there are, what's going to be covered in this webinar, it is in two things. I'm going to talk about introduction to indicators, and then indicators in the context of emergency. Okay. So first, I know that I'm talking to the specialist, and we know, and there are two types. Let's say that we're going to classify, or there is the classification of two types in general of education. We talk about formal education, which is mainly education that provide learning opportunities, at the main result or objective is accreditation, certification by it could be in a school, university. This is an official entity in any country. And I don't know how much programs we are doing on that side, but I would like to know more about that. But also on the other side, we have what we call non-formal education, which is an structured education that take place either within or outside the educational institutions. But the difference is that this kind of education does not lead to formal certification, meaning accreditation recognized by national authorities in the country where we are operating. However, it doesn't mean that we cannot get a certificate But in this case, the certificate or certification can be done by NGOs, faith-based organization. But the main difference is that one is recognized officially, government level, and the other one is not recognized, even though that we can provide the skills, the knowledge, but doesn't have that the same weight. So in that sense, I just want to mention that one because
Sorry to interrupt.
yes. Who is this?
Would you kindly take your microphone a little closer so that it can be clear to hear? Thank you.
Okay. Now you can hear me now better.
Yes.
Okay. So then that is what I just when I mentioned when we plan our projects. So there are two different ways that we can go. Where we're going to focus is our focus will be formal education or non-formal education. What I have seen, and might be wrong, but a lot of other projects in education that go more on the side of non-formal education. However, I have seen there are some few programs that they still work with formal education. Okay. What activities are included in non-formal education when we said, okay, we are going on formal education activities. So what activities should are included in this group? We're talking about this non-formal education normally take places in temporary learning spaces, but also can take place in child-friendly spaces. Okay. The kind of activities that fall under non-formal education that normally are implemented in emergency context is like cash art classes, remedial or after-school classes, literacy and numeracy support, accelerated education, and also life skills education. So that's kind of approaches or interventions that normally that are included in non-formal education. But also, even though that we say that is non-formal education is not go for accreditation, but the idea is that the curriculum of non-formal education as much as possible should be based in the curriculum of the specific country. So in that way, it will be easier to create the pathway of the children to go into formal education. That would be easier if the curricula that we're using in our intervention of non-formal education should be based in whatever curriculum the country has. So that can encourage the continuity in education. Okay, saying that, let's go more a little bit when we design a program. In any program, we need to measure change. Any intervention that we do, we always going to measure change. In this case, we're talking about education programs. So we have our goal and objective, which basically is what we plan to change and how it will be achieved. So it is what any single project is trying to achieve. Let's say if it's a cash out program, it's a accelerated program, out of the school children program, wherever it is, what are the change that at the end we want to achieve? And then that change is measured through indicators, because indicators that the evidence that is going to help us measuring the project related change. We're going to go more in depth on indicators this time. And then we need to monitor, because sometimes we believe that sometimes we believe that everything happened just by control remote, but that is not the case. We need to monitor the activities that are to be sure that activities are implemented, that everything that we plan are implemented according to the plan that we set up. So monitoring is gathering regular information so that can help us even do some adjustments to the activities, because as you know, one thing is the planning and another totally different is the implementation. And then we have evaluation, which is to analyze to connect if the activities that we implemented had actually produced the changes that we plan to achieve. So, and then they go for the cycle. So that is mainly in general, a summary when we try to measure project change, which basically is our meal plan. And this can be very simple, depending of the size of the project, or can be very complex, again, depending of how many interventions are you doing, depending on the complexity of the context, and also depending on the complexity of the change that we want to achieve. But whatever project it is, even if the project is easier or more difficult to implement, we need to measure success by a simple question and a very basic question, especially in education program. Are children gaining the essential knowledge, skill, and attitude to cope with the crisis faced by themselves and their community? So I like this question because, and I come from this tool education and emergency for children, because at the end of the day, sometimes we do a lot of things and we put indicators, so we do tools, and then we forget that all of these have an aim. And the basic question is this: if at the end of the project, any project that you're doing in education and not responding part of this, so we can say, well, we haven't achieved our main objective. Any project in education have to respond in this basic question. So I would like you to keep in mind this question, because it doesn't matter how complex will be your project, still you should be asking this question over and over during your implementation. So you should adjust your interventions if the question in some extent is the answer to this question is not positive. Okay, let's go for more indicator. What do you look at? I would like you to put in the chat, or if you can unmute, what do you see in the screen? What you can see in the screen?
Performance indicators are the key tool used to monitor project progress.
Yeah, but what do you see in the graph?
I can see the graph that the trees that with the leaf falling down from the tree branch.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, that's it. A tree and leaves are falling down. One leaf is in the tree.
Okay, what idea give us when you say the tree is falling down, the leaves are falling down? What idea? What is happening there?
There is no fruits.
Sorry?
There is no fruits.
Okay, there is no fruit. That's good. But
And,
what else?
That
also told you it's a spring or winter.
Yeah,
Oh,
storm,
maybe
storm, yeah.
Yeah, maybe this is a storm, you say that?
Yeah.
Somebody say that it's a storm. And a storm means that there is a strong wind. That's it? Can we see the wind here?
We cannot see the wind, but we can see the effect of the wind is bending down.
Exactly. Thank you. So indicators is like that. There is things that we don't know, we cannot see like the wind that is happening, but we see some, I can say, some things that happen in there that are giving me an idea that something else is happening. For example, you mentioned the trip is bending, the leaves are falling down. So that gives me the idea there is either a strong wind, or there is a winter time, or there is something happening there that the trip is making the falling. So when you talk about indicators, so indicator is the evidence that provide us with that give us an idea what is happening in our project. So they said something is happening here, and those, like, and I say the number of trees that are falling down, just to give you this an example, or to say I can measure maybe how strong is the wind. If the tree at the end is breaking down, and I can say, well, the wind has been very strong. What I'm trying to say is that indicators are the evidence that tell us what is going on in a certain time and context. But also what I can say is that indicators are only tell us a partial part of the story. It doesn't tell us everything. That is why sometimes we need more than an indicator to tell us the true story of what happened. Another way to see the indicators is that indicators are the proof that convinced others that the result actually occurred. For example, the guy here, they say, I got the diploma. What does it mean that I got the diploma? What proven me? You are working in education. What does it mean?
This is the result.
It's a result. He got the diploma. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's showing me that he at least finished something. That correct?
Yes, this is correct.
Okay.
Finished her education, his or her education. That's why he got the diploma, the result card.
Okay. With that, let me ask you a question. With that diploma, can I know how good the student is or the professional? Should I know how good it is at math or whatever profession that he had been finishing? Can I know just by looking at the diploma?
Not exactly, unless he or she is in the practical field. This is a certificate, a paper documents and recognition that he or she has completed such and so degree and all.
Okay. Any other idea? Exactly. The only thing that I can, I have evidence now with the diploma of this person is that he finished the course. Probably he passed the score. Maybe the passing grade was 50 and he got 51, but they got hit. And it's different than somebody that passed with 100%. So what I'm trying to say here again is that indicators is the proof, but also indicators cannot tell everything. So it's always going to tell you a partial view of what is happening. That is what we need to have more than one indicator. Just one indicator is not enough to measure the results of our projects. Okay, let's go and quickly and more in depth what actually indicators. What I mentioned here, indicators are variables that shows a change for a baseline level at the start of the intervention to another level after the intervention that have to make an impact. And also indicators are provide us with critical information on performance, achievement, and accountability. There are some characteristics that good indicators have, and probably some of you already know that the acronym that is SMART. I'm not going to go and mindful with the time. But it's smart, meaning that a specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So this is something that we need to be very clear. And please, especially when you choose your indicators, you have to be aware of the time of your project, the frame or the time frame of your project, because an indicator could be very good, but because you have a project of 6 months, you cannot achieve good result. So when you talk about specific, you need to be as specific as possible so you know what specifically you are measuring. And when we talk about measurable, of course, we need to be able to measure the indicator, otherwise we will have a problem. But however, saying that, there are some things that are important but are not very easy to measure. And sometimes we go to measure the easy things and we don't measure the actual thing that matter, the actual thing that we need to measure. Other characteristics of a good indicator is that they should be clear and concise. They need to focus on a single, providing relevant on the single issue, meaning measure one thing at a time. However, saying that, you will see that some of the standard indicators that I'm going to show you later include more than this, but we are going to discuss that. So indicators should be focused just on one thing at a time, and they should provide information, especially for effective planning, sound decision making. So the indicator that we should give us information to make decisions and to show that we are tracking the progress of our project. Also, indicators are also defined by the feasibility of collecting meaningful and credible data for them. Sometimes we can decide for a very good indicator, but it's not feasible to collect them. Sometimes we say, oh yeah, we are going to collect all the enrollment of the students in the school, but then we found out, and that was an example, one program in Peru, they said, okay, we are going to get the records for the students from all the schools, but then the Minister of Education said we cannot share the records with anybody. So that is something that we need to take into account, whether how feasible it is to collect and how meaningful it is to collect the data. Incredible. But also there is always a trade-off. Sometimes could be feasible but not meaningful, or sometimes it's credible data and meaningful, but it's not feasible to collect that one. So there is always a trade-off in this time. Also, indicators should tell us about provision and quality of education. It's not enough that indicators, it's only giving us the idea that education is being provided and is accessible, but also the indicators should tell us that education is the good quality. So it's essential that we have indicators that cover both aspects, that education is being provided, but also we need to have indicators about how the quality of the services, of the education that we are providing it is. What indicators tell us? Why we collect indicators? What indicators should tell us as a project managers or meal specialists? Indicators should tell us about provision of service, and then may include ability of educational facilities, if a number of qualified teachers available, also can tell us disaggregated rates for enrollment, attendance, and completion. So those are the things that when we set up our indicators in our program, education program, those are the things that indicators can tell us depending of what indicator were selected. Also, the indicators tell us about what is the quality of education, especially when talking about quality of education, We are talking about student satisfaction and confidence, achievement and pass rates of students, level and content of teaching training. And we can tell us also dropout and repetition rate by sex and grade level. And other things, okay, before I go into the strands, what I'm trying to say here is that when you set up the indicators, you need to know what information I need to have to make decisions in my intervention. So depending of if I'm doing like cash up programs, doing accelerated programs, whatever the intervention it is, I need to ask myself, what information do I need to actually show that my project is doing progress, but also to respond the basic question that we mentioned at the beginning, which was if the children are actually acquiring all the skills and the knowledge to survive on the context that they have. So those are the things that we need to know, and these are what I just presented is one of some of the things that indicators can tell us to track the progress of our projects. Okay, there are some strands in education in emergency, and I'm going to show you some of them, like access to education. It's ensuring continuing access to school, especially in emergency context. You know that an earthquake or a flooding, whatever emergency or disaster it is there, always there is, most of the time, it's an interaction of kids going to the school. So one of the intervention is access to education. So which meaning is ensuring continuing access to a school. Another one is safe and secure learning environment, which is basically providing children with safe and secure learning environments. We're going to see a little bit more later with some of the indicators, and I'm quite sure that you know uh, those interventions because I'm quite sure that uh, some of you, if not all of you, are already familiar with this kind of interventions and standards. And another strand in emergency education is psychosocial well-being of students, which meaning is supporting the psychosocial well-being of a student through the deployment of school counselors, or that is just an example of one of the intervention. It could be somebody. It could be that we, in our school, what we are doing, what we can do is maybe we don't have those services, but we can identify another organization that are providing those services, and we can do the transfers of a student needing, because you know, when an emergency occurs, children, students, teachers in general, they're affected by that. That reminded me that I just last year I went to Syria and visited one of the education programs that we have with private grants. When I interviewed some of the children and students, the children and the teacher, they were telling me that say how psychologically had been affected when they have to go to a school that is almost destroyed. They said, we didn't know we have to sit down on the floor. The children said we didn't want even to study because the walls were awful and the windows, they're broken. It was very cold in the winter time. And then because we are doing a rehabilitation of the schools there, and then when I asked them, what do you think right now? And they said, well, now everything is better. And they say, I feel like more encouraged to come, not to miss classes, because my classroom is so nice. And I got a desk where to sit down. There are blackboard here. It's warm here and cozy. So that is how the psychosocial and the well-being of the students are affected, and not only them, but also the teachers. So another intervention is quality teaching and learning, which is developing alternative modalities of learning and develop capacity of teachers. So again, one of the examples I can give you here, again, in Syria, in this program that's being implemented, they are using active learning. So I saw, I interviewed the teachers, and they were so happy that now they have a different way of teaching, making more participatory. So the students were learning faster, and they were happier that they are doing this. And also I saw this intervention in a temporary center in Peru. And also we have an education private grant there. So where the teachers are using new methodologies, active learning, so that helping the students learning faster. And the final one, it is, we're talking about parent and community engagement, which is an intervention uh, which is more on strengthening and encouraging parents to participate, uh, to get involved in their children education. We are talking about like parent associations in the schools, parents association helping the teachers or the school master, the head of the school, to help on how to improve and how to make the environment or of the learning for the student better. So, and as teachers and parents work it together, so that teachers can, sorry, parents can support children education. So those are more or less, and I'm quite sure that most of the time, education interventions are a mix of some of them, sometimes one or two, sometimes all of them, depending on the complexity of the project. But I'm quite sure that it's not only just one, that is more than one intervention that happened in a project. So when we talk about access, going more on the indicators, we talk about access and inclusion of education. Some of the things that we measure, and I'm going to give you afterwards some of the uh, example of the indicators, because I had been reviewing when Billy asked me to do this webinar, and I had been actually researching a lot of documents, especially the different donors, international donors with that have standard indicators, and also standards for education implementation activities. So some of those, looking at all of this, so when talking about access and inclusion, the things that we need to measure, and I'm going to give you some of the indicators, is like a student enrollment, a student attendance rate, and gender ratio, like talking about dropout rates with gender ratio, average class size, and you can see some of them are for formal and all ones for non-formal education, and there are some of them that can be applied for both. Like for example, a student attendance rate, it can be used for non-formal or formal education also. Average class size, equitable educational participation, access to educational materials, adequate school infrastructure. Quite sure that some of you are working on rehabilitating maybe schools. When we talk about access and inclusion, we're talking about measuring how adequate the school infrastructure is. Access to safe water at the schools, again, depending on the intervention that you have. For example, in the case of Syria, they were being building these schools and also providing water to the school, and not only the water, but also providing agenda. I mean, separate for children and for girls. And also I was so happy to see that also they thought about children with discapacities. So they have like some of the toilets that have a ramp so that kids with wheelchairs can go into the bathroom. So that was good. And then also we can ask for beneficiary satisfaction. No? So when we talk about access and inclusion, sometimes we can think about, okay, this is good that we can do it, but then it's another story when we ask about the beneficiary satisfaction, and especially when not only ask satisfaction of teachers, but also satisfaction of the children, because those are the ones that are using the services, and also they are using the infrastructure in terms of access and inclusion. And some example of indicator is like, for example, number of targeted girls and boys enrolled in formal education services, number of targeted girls and boys enrolled in non-formal education services, and also percentage of learning with disability. Target this indicator, especially I found in USA that have some of indicator that I'm going to show you. Like a percentage of learners with disability targeted with USAID assistance who attain a minimum grade level proficiency in reading at the grade of 2. I see Joao has raised his hand. Have a question?
Just a quick question.
Yes.
I am not sure if you could explain to me if the first one, for example, if this is a smart indicator, because I don't see a time bound. Can you please develop on this?
Okay, that's a good question. You know, that will depend of different donors have different weight or stating the indicator, but it doesn't mean that because one thing is the indicator, another thing is the definition of the indicator. In the definition of the indicator, we explain more in detail what is going to. When you say time bound, it's because normally it's a number of target by the end of the project, for example, that is a time bound. But this indicator, if in the definition, you can include that. You can even include the age, because here it doesn't mention what age. So it depends on the program, you can adapt. But I just want to mention that this is some of the standard indicators that are already there that donors are using, you know. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I said indicator should focus just in one thing. But here we are measuring girls and boys. What happened that we have only the registration of the girls, but no boys? It means I cannot measure this indicator because the indicator say girls and boys enroll. At the end of the day, in practical, I will keep girls and boys separately and tracking, even though that I have to report this indicator. I don't know if that answered your question, Joao.
Okay, when we have more examples in the future, we can further discuss this.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, again, it depends of how the donor require. You know, not every donor, and I know what you mean, because a lot of donors say, oh, I have to do this by the end of this time. And if it is not there, they say, oh, it is not time bound. Not necessarily, okay? Another example is like attendance rate, which is the percentage of children enroll, sorry. Okay. Attendance rate is percentage of enrolled students attending a school in a given time period. What does it mean? For example, let's say that you have 100 students enrolled, but then today you go and do the attendance rate and there is only 60 students that particular day attend the school. And then it should be, the attendance rate should be 60 over 100, divided by 100, that we should be 60% attendance rate, okay? Then another example is dropout rate, which is the percentage of a student who enrolled but did not complete the grade X. That will depend on your intervention. Which grade are you teaching, or you're doing different grades in a given school year? Normally, we measure that one, like let's say that we have 100 students enroll, and then only 90 students completed the course. And then you say 100 minus 90, that should be 10, divided by 100, that were the students, the total student, that should be 10% dropout rate in that case. And then we have like average class size, which basically the average number of students per class. I don't know if there is any questions on these indicators. I just mentioned these are most of the more common and standard indicators that are used in formal and sometimes in non-formal education. Okay, let me go. Then when we talk about quality education, there are a lot of these indicators that you can choose, like trained teachers, teacher supervision, parent engagement in education, minimum education standards, complaint reporting mechanisms. Yeah, I'm going to give you some of the examples of indicators. Also, we talk about psychosocial well-being of children, reading with comprehension, national exam result. For example, if we talk about formal education, one way to measure the progress is how many students or percentage of students that achieve the or pass the exam depending on the threshold that is set up depending on the country. For example, some example of quality education indicator is number of percentage of teacher education personnel who successfully completed a training program. As you can see again, this is a standard indicator, but we see we have teachers and education personnel. We are measuring two things at the same time, which is go against the definition, the general definition indicator. But that is the way the donors are using that. At the end of the day, you have to track separately, because what is the problem with this indicator is that what happened if the teachers completed the training successfully, but not the education personnel. So you couldn't you couldn't measure the indicator because just measure just one thing. That are the complications. So that a lot of, I'm quite sure that you came across this indicator because some donors that require those things. So I just want to mention, because you need to keep that on that. There is somebody that wanted, yes.
Yeah, I wanted to say that when it comes to psychosocial well-being of children, the methodology or format can be adjusted to their skill level. I know in Iraq, there was basically World Vision. What they did, they wanted to understand, let's say, the well-being of children. So instead of giving them like a survey to fill out, what they had them do, they had them draw what they were experiencing. And you can see from the start of the war till the end how their drawing went from dark to bright, how it went from in dark in terms of color, but also dark in terms of themes. They drew guns, but it went from guns to flowers to butterfly. So these are some creative indicators that can be used in education, and it was also an emergency context. So depending on, let's say, the needs of the children, I think some of them can be adjusted to that context.
Of course. And also, just Billy mentioned that psychosocial well-being is one of the most difficult things to measure, because that is not an easy one. And you mentioned about the drawing. Yeah, and I knew that because it happened that my daughter is doing a master's degree in art therapy for children in psychology. So she was showing me all this drawing because she had the internship. She had been doing an international school, so working with immigrants. Another indicator that is percentage of students in grade, specified the grade, is scoring above, and that will depend on the threshold of the country, percentage in a national exam, language, literacy, and numeracy, and math. So another indicator is like percentage of students who by the end of grade 2 can read and write with fluency and comprehension. That means that not only can read, but can understand what they are reading. Number of teachers provided with teaching aid materials, that's an easy indicator. Number of girls and boys provided with learner materials. There is another one, number of teacher education personnel showing increasing knowledge and teaching a skill to address children learning needs. So this increasing knowledge, it will depend of the content of your training and what are the needs of the children that you're attending. So you will measure that one. Another one is number of student teacher, another education personnel that are provided with psychosocial support services. Another one is number of teacher and other education personnel showing increased knowledge and a skill to address protection needs of girls and boys. These are some of the echo indicators. So there is there is one that is called interagency indicators, and also interagency standards that I'm quite sure that you have came across these documents, but I have reviewed a lot of those documents. And there is another indicator that is percentage of targeting children who transitioning into formal from non-formal education or into the next level of non-formal education, or could be into the next academic year or formal education. So this is a good one, especially when we talk about even for sustainability, because that gives an idea that the children are continuing their education. Okay, I see that you have again his hand raised. So yes, please.
Can you please go back to the previous slide?
Yes, this one.
Yeah, on the first one, I can say that this is really well. People use this, an organization uses this, but what is it exactly measuring right there? Because it's just, isn't it the activity? We are just making a report of the activity that we have. X number of people attended to this, but we are not measuring any change, correct?
Yeah, but remember that there are the indicators at different levels. So indicators are I could say this is an output level indicator. And because you have to achieve first, remember that an output is the goods and services that are delivered to the community to make the outcome or the change happen. So one way to measure at the beginning, and it is one, is first that you are providing the support. So then the next one, that should be the increased knowledge on the skills to address the psychosocial needs to the student. You know, without the first one, you cannot achieve the change. You know, different indicators at different levels that measure different things. In this case, this is measuring the support, psychosocial support services that they are receiving. That's it. And because if you don't deliver the psychosocial support services, you are not going to expect that the teachers will achieve the change with the children. I don't know if that responds your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Nestor, also I want to
Yes.
add, and some of these indicators are assigned, let's say, by the local officials or local government, and sometimes you have to have a middle ground. So some things may be confusing, but it's one thing that's good about the indicators is that you can be as detailed as possible, but sometimes you can be so detailed that you cannot share your data with other agencies or even local government. So sometimes it's really good to know your context, and that also explain, let's say, the people that you're working on with, and also your donors, so that some of these indicators can be, and sometimes these indicators are already available. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can extract those information from those places. Nestor, we only have 9 minutes, so I don't know if we can also have time during those 9 minutes to allow more questions, and yeah, and to wrap it up.
Yeah,
So
and I think let me finish that one, and can we leave the question at the end so that we can, okay? So when talk about education capacity system, you can see basically is indicators talking about the participation of parents in the engaged in the school affairs. You have this example of these two indicators. And then I just want to mention some of the challenges that we have for monitoring and evaluation in education emergency. The typical one, projects are often under budgeted for doing monitor and evaluation activities, and then they are not taken into full account during the proposal process. Remember that if you don't measure your activities or your changes, you won't have evidence to prove that you have been success. So, and it's very important to track accurate evidence, and that is through MIL. Then completing a set of activities that not always achieve the desired objective. What it means that it could be that you implement very strictly all your activities, but at the end you don't find the changes, because that would be a failure of a strategy or a failure of theory of change. Even though that you implemented everything correctly, but you don't have the changes. Some objectives, especially psychosocial well-being, and very difficult to measure. Frequent population shift, especially in emergency context, mean student achievement is difficult to measure. We are having this problem with Venezuelan immigrants in all the countries that were implemented. It's very difficult to find them because they are always moving. So that is all the challenges that we have. Due to the lack of expertise, project may employ invalid or unreliable methods for collecting data. Lack of training on data collection can also lead to unreliable results. And also, and that is very important, there is little consistency amongst agency data collection firms, meaning that it's difficult to compare projects on an interagency level, because everybody is, even though that measure may be the same indicator, but the definition is different. And just very quickly, and I don't have time to make, when you talk about inclusive education, you see, I'm quite sure that you have seen this equality and equity, but what I want to mention is that, for example, in this case, equity, the teacher, the admit in this case, not only need to have access to education material, but also the teacher needs to know and have the skills to better support this guy, so to allow him to participate and learn. So some of the indicators, some of the, for learning environment, here you can see there are some of the indicators, but also some of the standards that we need to take into account. We don't have much time to go through in detail on that, but also some of the indicators for protection and well-being is percentage of targeted learning spaces with disaster reduction process in place. Another 1% of children, teacher, and other staff who report and feeling safe in a school and the way to from the school. And this is a qualitative indicator, which is good, and they give us more than a number. Okay. And there, when talk about facilities and service, you can see some of the indicator that we can measure, and I'm quite sure that Bill is going to share the presentation, so with everybody you can read all of the indicators. Then ECHO have some kind of standards when you talk about learning the spaces, establish or restore to minimum standards. You can see some of the minimum standards that ECHO have, and that will depend from country to country where they are. And also I put some of the resources here, some of the documents that I review to put this presentation. So yeah, thank you. I think we have at least 5 minutes to have some questions. Thank you very much. I know that the time is short. There are so much to say on this. Yeah, this has been very my pleasure being with you, with the specialists, and yeah, we are here to help and wherever we can.
Thank you. And I hear it from Nestor's voice that maybe he wants to have a part 2. So Nestor, let's discuss that. But for now, let's have questions. And I know one of the questions that I've been getting is, will this presentation be available? So yes, it will be available. As we shared before, please go on ADRA's Hub. The link has been shared on the chat, but I'll share it again. That's where we'll be posting not only the presentation, but also the recording. So yes, if anybody else has any other questions, now is the time. Okay, hearing none. If you enjoyed the presentation and also you want to see Nestor and his team come back again and give more meal presentation, I don't know how many times, but yeah, please indicate that on the chat and show your appreciation to to Nestor. I learned a lot. It's really interesting that some of the basic information or basic tenets of, let's say, humanitarian aid, we forget. And Nestor did a great job. So with that, Nestor, I really appreciate you for being part of the for presenting the meal indication. There is, like you said, there is a lot to learn. And for those of you who wants to join our community of practice, where we'll be posting more of those videos and resources, we invite you to join our Hub space on ADRA Hub. I see a hand from Ronnie. Go ahead, Ronnie.
Thank you for allowing me to speak a little bit. I don't have any question because every country has a different situation, but most of the purpose or the goal is to raise the children with have a good education and safe environment and somehow like that. So one thing that I'm interested from this presentation, that about the tool and the indicator, it's really help us a lot, especially that the tool of the tree. It seems like I can use it for others topic that it can be helpful. So thanks for sharing that good presentation. That's all from me.
Yes, thank you so much, Ronnie. Nestor, did you want to say anything?
Oh, yeah. Well, there are some tools that I found and I can share, but all things what I would like to suggest is that we are already working. So it'd be good that we can collect the tools that are, they are using right now, so that we can look at that and we can standardize so that we can have a package like a toolkit for everybody. That will be a good start. And then we can combine with some of the standard tools that I had found for some donors. There are very good documents that I'm going to, and in some of the links that I mentioned there, you can use it like Indicate. They have more on the definition of indicator, very detailed. And also the USAID, they have what we call the peers, which is giving you very detailed information how to collect the data. If you need to that example, the definition exactly of the indicator, that is very important to standardize the way we measure those indicators. And we can share that one.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm assuming there are no more questions. If that's the case, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you also, Nestor, for this wonderful presentation. We can't wait to hear more about that. And we will be working on more webinars from the Education Technical Learning Lab. Please stay informed with the education community of practice, where we will not only post those webinars, but we're also going to post some resources. I was just informed that there was a new report out there showing the efficiency of some of the education programs that we as an NGO or even other NGOs, their efficiency in building knowledge. So it's a great report. It's going to be posted very soon, and also more information about next webinars. So with that, we will stop. And thanking you for joining us, and until next time, bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
It's good
you.
evening from here.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.